Welcome to the Apartment Investor Show, where we help you get smart and invest smarter in multifamily real estate. I'm your host, JC Castillo, founder and managing principal of the Multifamily Property Group. And joining me, as always, is my good buddy, my co-host, the godfather of lending, Mr. Paul Peebles, national underwriter for Old Capital Lending. Paulie, how are you feeling today?
I'm doing great, JC. It is a little cold in Texas, so you can see all the guys in Texas are all wearing sweaters today, I would probably imagine.
Sweaters. It might be even a little bit colder than that for sweaters, but maybe since they're indoors, they got sweaters on.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, Paulie, I am super excited about today's episode. We've got some real heavy hitters coming at our guest today. And as we always say, we do not like talking heads. We like to hear the data from the experts, and there are two experts we got on the line today. Today we're going to talk about a really interesting topic for all of you viewers out there. There are many times where you may have an apartment complex and you may be ready to sell that complex, and actually you might want to consider selling it to a developer. And so if you are in a situation where you've got a property and you think it has the potential to be sold to a developer, today we're going to talk about the top things to look out for when selling your property to a developer. This is a great topic, and in order to cover this topic correctly, we've actually brought in two huge brokerage players in the DFW market to talk to our audience about what it takes to sell their property successfully to a developer. So I want to welcome to the show Mr. Will Jarnagin and Mr. Michael Ware of Berkadia. Guys, welcome to the show, and thanks a lot for making time.
Thanks, JC. Thanks, Paul. Good to see you guys.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Absolutely. We're happy to have you. Now, for all you viewers out there that may not be familiar with Will and with Michael, first of all, the first thing you got to know about these guys is they came into the real estate brokerage business together, and they have been together pretty much since they started their careers. I mean, this is like we're like talking Steph Curry and oh gosh, how am I going to forget the other guy's name? Klay Thompson. Exactly. We're like It's like Steph and Klay, right? So these guys have been together since day one, and they've been crushing it.
I see that more like Danny DeVito and Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Right.
Well, I didn't want to go there, but now that you say it, I think that's a much better fit. So
we're twins.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are right. I do resemble Arnold Schwarzenegger quite a bit.
I look a lot like Danny, so it's good. It's a good fit.
Well, we're gonna roll with that. Well, but here's the deal. All you
that
viewers
better not
out there.
stick, guys.
No. Here's the deal, guys. These guys are serious players in the market space. I mean, they have a lot of fun with what they do, but they have, over their careers, last 14 years, get this, they have transacted $3.5 billion of apartment family, multifamily transactions, and they have transacted over 50,000 units between themselves. So that is pretty incredible. That is a large breadth of experience and information to bring to the table. And the other thing that I want to talk about is that these guys are pretty much two of the masters at marketing properties and selling to developers. So not only do they have a big breadth of experience selling traditional multifamily sales to traditional multifamily buyers, but they have a ton of experience selling existing lots and properties to developers. So that is exactly what we want to talk about today. So let's get on with it, guys. We want to get right down to it. So I'm going to hit you off with some questions here, and we're just going to get your feedback. So if there is an apartment operator or owner out there that has an apartment property, what would be an ideal target for a developer in terms of a property that they would be looking for?
Essentially, the term covered land play comes from the idea that you would buy an existing, infill piece of real estate where it has an ongoing operational concern. And so the term covered comes from that the actual income derived from the property is actually covering the operating, costs or the holding costs of the potential land. And so, whereas by comparison, whenever you buy a piece of land that doesn't have anything on it, that has no ongoing concern property, that there's holding costs associated with that piece of land until you get it up and built and cash flowing. So a covered land play really can be any type of property that whether it be multifamily or some other product type that has existing cash flow and operations that will cover the cost of the property until it is redeveloped.
So to Will's point, and he has an interesting take on this, we've all heard about kind of the Amazon phenomenon, how they're pushing big box retail, right, kind of out of the picture, and how it's harder and harder for some of these power centers or shopping centers to keep their big box space filled. And we're hearing from the apartment developers that it's harder and harder for us to find traditional land sites, and they're starting to look more and more at like your Office Depots, right, or kind of your big box power centers that are on Main and Main, right, would be perfect or ripe for a multifamily development with like a retail out parcel. And it's interesting talk to see how these guys are going to go after kind of that product that's becoming, I think, functionally obsolescent, right, and getting pushed out by just shifting trends and kind of distribution and online shopping.
Well, so let's say, guys, that I'm an apartment owner, right? And you and I, and we've actually been working together on a project that fits exactly this box, where we transacted with a property that you guys brought to us, and there was some telltale signs of it being a good fit for a developer. And sure enough, that's exactly what looks like is going to happen, is that we're going to sell this property. But let's say that I'm a property owner, and I'm sniffing out that this could be a real good opportunity. Now, I can go sell this multifamily property to another multifamily operator just as easily as I can do anything else. How is it different? How does a developer value this property differently than a traditional multifamily buyer? And why is that so valuable to me as a potential seller?
Sure. So I think that what a developer is looking at is primarily what the property is going to become in their vision, as opposed to what the property currently is, the way that you're operating it, or the way that a potential subsequent value add operator would operate the property. So the traditional acquisition model of buying a property, upgrading it, and trying to get a little bit better rents really doesn't apply to developers, because it doesn't make sense for them to spend any money on the value add component of the property. They are really looking at what they are going to turn the property into. And in the case of, an up zone where you have a functionally obsolescent two-story property where they're trying to build something that's 3, 4, maybe 5 or 6 stories and add density, they're ultimately looking at the property as not what the 100 or so units that it is today, but the 300 potentially that that they could develop, and what kind of rents they're going to get from those, and ultimately what that would be worth as an apartment complex of 300 units built in 2021, as opposed to whatever it may be, 100 units built in the 1960s.
There's also public-private partnerships that developers can tap into with regard to like 380s or tax abatements, or the qualified opportunity zone has been a big buzzword we've heard the last couple of years, where they can divert capital gains. So there's all kinds of incentives out there that are on a deal-by-deal basis, depending on which municipality they fall in, that the developers, it's a whole nother world and a pre-development that most of us really, unless you're in that space, you don't really hear about it or see it. But there's a lot of incentives that actually make the deal more attractive to a developer that a value add operator is otherwise not able to get a hold of.
Yeah, and what I've seen from selling to developer is the bottom line is that you can get basically you can get a better return on your investment by selling it to developer potentially than selling it to a traditional operator. We've got experience where we've got a property that we're in contract with, again through your help, to sell to a developer, and the terms that we were looking to get out there and what we could get with a traditional multifamily operator buying our property didn't really come close to what we could achieve with a developer. So at the end of the day, all things being equal, if we can get a better price and better terms ultimately from a developer, then that's certainly going to be a strong consideration for us when we're looking to exit a property.
Yeah. And to that point, there are not a lot of multifamily properties where that is necessarily the case. Typically, what you're dealing with is, at least in our marketplace, the place in which we're the most familiar, you're typically looking at very infill locations inside the city, and where the highest and best use of the property has changed from what currently is on it. And, so you typically don't see that as you get further out, where the highest and best use of the property probably is as an ongoing apartment project that can be value added. In certain cases in these infill areas, the price appreciation of the land, and in addition to that, some of the city objectives in terms of how they want to reshape neighborhoods cause the highest and best uses of the properties to change over time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So let's talk about this. This is really important. So let's say that there is a property out there that is attractive to developer, and the multifamily owner that's out there happens to come to terms on selling a property to developer. What are some things that are going to be different on a purchase agreement than sort of selling to a traditional multifamily operator?
So I would say that the big two to me are going to be, or just to set expectations for anyone who would be looking into that, is expect a longer timeline, right? So when we sell a value add deal, as you guys all know, we have pretty tight timelines. So you have either a 21-day due diligence or a 30-day. There's usually non-refundable earnest money up front, contingent on maybe title and survey and environmental, and that's it, right? The developer is not going to give you that. There are so many moving parts and variables that those guys have to check off the list that they'll typically put up, I'm not going to call it insignificant, but not a large, earnest money check, and for the most part, it's going to be refundable until they pass certain milestones. I'd say the timelines are considerably longer. So like we're used to a 21 or call it a 30-30 with a 15-day extension maybe, right? So a 75-day sales process for a traditional value add deal, you're looking at anywhere from 180 to 270 days, maybe even longer on a development deal. And it's usually a 90-day due diligence with a 90-day close. And those guys usually build in a couple 30-day extensions. And you're not going to go really non-refundable until after that 90 days or maybe 120 days where they're checking off, because those guys have to go get zoning. So they got to go through zoning and then the city council and go get entitlements. And it's, sometimes they have to lawyer up, and then you got to go fight if you have an aggressive local community, so to speak, who are resistant to maybe new development. That's a fight. And so it's just a long and complicated process. And I feel like the seller and the buyer probably work together more in one of these transactions than what we see in a traditional kind of middle market deal.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that.
Yeah, and I would add that one thing to keep in mind is if you are in a scenario where your property is worth more to a developer than it is to a traditional value add operator, then you're more likely to make some exceptions to the way that a traditional value add buyer would buy the property in those timelines, because there's incentive in it for you. Obviously, it's a little bit more of a risk because you're dealing with some unknown variables throughout the process. But in general, the reason that developers, don't put up hard money the way that value add operators do is because their pursuit costs are significantly more expensive on the deals. Michael mentioned going through the zoning process, the legal process. Only once they've gone through all that process can they then go and actually get their construction financing, done. So there's a longer timeline. It's significantly more expensive than buying a few third-party reports from an approved vendor off of a lender's list. And so, that process, there's incentive in it for the seller to accept those terms. There's a little bit more risk, but there's a little bit more reward in it from selling to a traditional value add buyer as well.
So if you could give some advice to prospective sellers that are looking to sell to developers, what are some top things that they should sort of be careful about when we're negotiating a sale to a developer? What are some things that can trip them up?
I would say I'll rattle off a couple. Will I just say reputation? Like there's not a whole lot of developers. There's probably 100 to 120 developers in DFW, and out of those 120, maybe like 25 are actually just programmatic, systematic developers, right? Most of those guys are just trying to make a living like everyone else, right? And all of them have a reputation in the market. And I would say just it's pretty easy to call around to the brokerage community and kind of find out if you are working with someone how they are to do business with. Again, to me, it's more of the seller and buyer work a lot more together in one of these transactions than a typical value add, an as is deal where they're just taking it and on to the next one. You're gonna be under contract for the better part of a year. So I feel like just do a little bit of upfront research on who you're going to work with, and rely on your broker to kind of tell you who they are and how they operate. And I think that's important because you are going to tie your property up for a significant amount of time.
Make sure that you understand what the developer's objective, what their final, plan is for the property before you go into a contract with them, because what you want to avoid is an outlandish plan that's never going to have a chance of getting approved or something like that. And of course, if you follow Michael's number one rule, which is deal with guys who are credible and won't waste your time, you'll avoid this. But I think it's important just to make sure that you understand what they're doing, that it's a feasible thing. You're essentially going to be partnering with them through the process. And so making sure that you fully understand what their intentions are with the property and that is a viable option, that makes the probability of getting to the closing table much higher.
Well, I mean, that's great advice. And I think that, my advice to all you viewers out there is if you are going to look at selling your property to a developer, work with brokers that have a ton of experience in it, because as Michael and as Will have pointed out, at least in the DFW Metro, if they don't at least know of every single shop out there, they've probably actually done transactions with a big majority of them. So that helps quite a bit when you're thinking that this might be the route to go. So definitely reach out to these guys. So Michael and Will, if somebody wanted to get a hold of you guys to talk to you about potentially selling their property, how can they get hold of you?
Will Jarnagin, my email address is WILL.JARNAGIN@Berkadia.com. And my direct phone line in the office is 972-458-6868.
Michael Ware, MICHAEL.WARE@Berkadia.com, and you can reach me direct at 972-458-6841.
All right.
Yeah, if you get one, you get the other. So
That's right.
It's all the same.
They are twins, So great information from the guys over at Berkadia. They do a great job. Thoroughly endorse Michael and Will. And JC, tell us a little bit about what you do.
What we do. Well, we've been helping for the last 13 years. We've been helping investors make smart multifamily investment decisions. We're one of those rare companies that's been around since before the Great Recession. We were buying deals before the recession, during the recession, and after the recession. So we really focus not only on what can go right with these deals, because we've certainly had a good run, but we're also very acutely aware of what can go wrong. And so we're very focused on risk-adjusted returns and not just raw returns. So if anybody out there is getting started in multifamily and has any questions, we offer a free 15-minute consultation. You can go to our website, multifamilypropertygroup.com. Again, multifamilypropertygroup.com, and you can schedule on the Contact Us page a 15-minute consultation, and we would be happy to sit down with you and see how we can help you out.
Yeah, if you're selling a property too and you have a big possible capital gain, you can possibly joint venture with JC and his partner Eric to talk about trying to do maybe a transaction together. So we've seen that too, of what Eric and JC do. So again, I'm Paul Peebles with Old Capital Lending. Don't forget, January 15th, we're going to try to drag Michael and Will to the Old Capital Speaker Series. Greg Willett from RealPage will be there. We'll also have one of the chief economists for CoStar. So Greg will give us the national perspective of 2020, what that looks like. He's the guy that everybody refers to in apartment articles, television stuff. I mean, he is the guy. So he's going to be talking to about 300 of us. We want you there. Go to the oldcapitalpodcast.com and RSVP for that. If you do have a lending opportunity for us to take a look at and you need real straightforward advice, give us a call. Go to oldcapitallending.com, and just send us an email, and we can help you with that. So some great information from Will and from Michael. JC Castillo, I'm Paul Peebles. Have a great day.
Thanks, guys.